everyone. Welcome to the Global CXO Summit. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Emma Hall, and I am the Senior Executive Customer Programs Manager here at Zscaler. Our program today is focused on zero-day vulnerabilities and board communications. We're honored to be joined by some really fabulous speakers today who will be sharing insights on their experiences with board communication over the next hour. We look forward to your participation in today's conversation. Please submit your questions, engage with your peers in the chat box. We want to keep this as interactive as possible, and the panelists would be happy to answer your questions. If you have any technical questions, please reach out to cxosummit@zscaler.com, which is here on the screen. This is a public session. We will be recording and share the recording with you all afterwards so you can get some good takeaways. And please feel free to share and follow using the hashtag Zscaler Summit. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce Zscaler CISO, Deepan Desai. Deepan?
Hey, thank you, Emma. So I'm Deepan Desai, Zscaler CISO and Head of Security Research and Operations. I lead Threat Labs team, which is Zscaler's global team of security experts responsible for tracking and analyzing threats across the Zscaler cloud. Welcome everyone to the CXO Summit, and our topic of the hour, as Emma mentioned, is zero-day vulnerabilities and board communications. Today we are assessing the impact of critical vulnerabilities like Log4j and similar other zero-day vulnerabilities when they get disclosed. Specifically, we'll look at response tactics for Log4j, share best practices for thwarting zero-day attacks in future, and also discuss risk-related board engagement strategies. So whenever a disclosure like Log4j RCE happens, it is a great news for threat actors who get access to a huge attack surface to leverage in targeting exposed assets. Now, if Log4j vulnerability is exploited, a threat actor can, even without any type of authentication, perform remote code execution on a vulnerable system and take complete control. Right? This could be any asset that is exposed to the internet. It could also be a vulnerability that is on one of your applications that's out there, or it could be a different zero-day that is targeting one of your VPN servers as well. Now, how significant was this threat? Right? Thousands of organizations around the world were leveraging Log4j library. The flaw puts every single server with Log4j library, and more importantly, every single system that is connected to every single server with Log4j at risk. Log4j RCE vulnerability scored a 10 CVSS severity score, which is the highest for obvious reasons. It's easy for a threat actor to exploit the vulnerability. The flaw allows cybercriminal to target several exposed assets at the same time. In fact, when my team was monitoring this right after the disclosure happened in December, over the period of next 48 to 72 hours, we saw 150,000 attempts. Right? So many of these botnets, whether it's a crypto mining botnet or the InfoSealer ones, they implemented the scanning and exploit code right away, and they were able to target several assets in parallel. Right? And once one of those malware is able to achieve compromise, they take full control of the asset. They will download arbitrary payloads. They will also scan the environment so that they can propagate laterally inside the environment, taking control of more machines. Now, in many cases, we saw that a threat actor is able to inflict damage just by staying in the memory. Nothing was getting written to the disk. It's actually getting executed in the context of the Java process, which is what is running the library itself on the vulnerable system. And finally, Log4j creates a huge attack surface because of the sheer number of applications and cloud services that were using the library. One of the stats that the team pulled was there were more than 1,800 major repositories on GitHub that had dependencies on Apache Log4j library. So for already overworked IT security leaders like us, it can feel like Patch Tuesday is now every day, right? I mean, we're all dealing with some of the stuff that is happening right now where, the Viper malware attacks are being seen targeting several organizations. So how do you keep up? What do you do to reduce the attack surface in the light of zero-day vulnerabilities like Log4j? And how can you better protect your organizations against these type of attacks? So the CISO I speak with are on the journey to adopting a secure zero trust architecture. And my guidance is to embrace 4 key objectives of a zero trust architecture, which helps you defend against any type of zero-day attacks. And I'm going to briefly describe some of them for you right now. So the very first one is you need to think about what all assets should not be exposed to the internet, right? So eliminate your external attack surface or minimize it, right? You don't need to be using some of the legacy technologies that expand your attack surface. An example I can think of is VPN, right? Any asset that is exposed is a target for a threat actor, right? It could be a vulnerability that is already disclosed by your vendor. It could be a zero-day vulnerability. So you're always on the lookout for those and you're trying to patch those assets. But if it's behind a zero trust network access based infrastructure, you're basically eliminating those type of external attacks. Second very important thing is you need to prevent compromise, and that is where you need to have your security controls that are effective in eliminating the risk of that initial compromise. And my guidance here is to adopt a cloud-native proxy-based architecture that allows you to enforce consistent security policy with full SSL inspection. I mean, the last stat I saw, more than 85% of all internet-bound traffic that we see in our cloud from all the large enterprises is over encrypted channel. Right? So if you're not performing SSL inspection, you will be blind to a lot of those payloads, including the ones that were observed in Log4j or in the recent malware attacks that we're seeing. Now, specifically talking about Log4j, a threat actor will send a specially crafted HTTP request. If your server is vulnerable, Log4j library is going to make an outbound connection from your environment to the attacker's system. It will then download a stage 2 payload, which will subsequently serve malicious payloads on the server infrastructure. So with cloud native proxy architecture, you can extract those payloads from the connection. You could scan them with all the technology security stack, like whether it's sandboxing, IPS. You're able to block that even if they are being delivered over encrypted channel. And that's what we saw in the cloud, 150,000 plus attempts blocked within the first 72 hours. The third and the most important stage, in my opinion, is the lateral threat movement, right? So you need to have your controls aligned to prevent that lateral threat movement stage. Having one asset compromised versus having your entire environment compromised, right? It's the difference between an incident versus a large-scale breach. So your architecture should be designed in such a way that if a machine is compromised, the blast radius is limited to that single asset, right? Or at the bare minimum, less than what it usually is in case of flat networks where the attacker gets free rein to move around. So in case of Log4j vulnerability as well, the threat starts with the server that is running the vulnerable library, but any asset connected to that machine or that server environment was also part of the target. So over there, again, the goal is to implement a zero trust architecture that relies on user to app and app to app microsegmentation strategy so that the attacker is not able to move laterally in your environment. Fourth and the final stage, or the tenet of the zero trust architecture, is preventing data exfiltration. Right? All of these adversaries, majority of these attacks, whether it's targeted ransomware attacks, we saw many of the Log4j related campaigns as well. They're after your data, right? Whether they're exfiltrating the data or they're holding your data hostage to demand ransom in case of ransomware attacks. So with a full inline proxy-based architecture, you will be able to inspect anything that leaves all your endpoints as well as your environment, right? And perform consistent data loss prevention scanning. So the goal over there is nothing good should leak out from your environment, and you're only able to do that if you have that stack consistently applying inspection, no matter where your users are. Now, when I go through these tenets with the CISOs, they always ask like, where do I start? Like, how it sounds overwhelming to begin with, but honestly, it's a journey. Right? It's a journey to a zero trust architecture, and as zero-day vulnerabilities like Log4j illustrate, I mean, it's a journey your organization must embark upon. If you have a strong zero trust architecture in place, you will be better prepared to respond to these type of zero-day attacks.